Let me ask you a question. Would you agree with me when I say that the keys to a lot of the problems that we find ourselves bound in, that we find ourselves logged in, lie in our own heads, in our own thinking, in our own minds, in our own hearts, to that effect, in our own consciousness? I think that's absolutely true. And I think the fact that very few people actually recognize this is one of the biggest crises of our times. In the age of social media, in the age of the internet, the personalized data feeds that we see across all of these different platforms, including YouTube, by the way, this is almost a project which is of an urgent need now. The project of upgrading your own thinking, the project of upgrading your own perspectives about life, the project of upgrading your consciousness. Now, don't get me wrong. I think this is one project, the project of upgrading your consciousness. I think this is one project that has attracted and interested human beings across all walks of life for throughout human history. But the fact is that today's day and age, the personalized data feeds that we find ourselves in, the echo chambers that we find ourselves surrounded by throughout our days, I think this project has become almost an urgent necessity now. And that is what today's video is all about. This is part two of a four-part series where I sit with Rocco Jarman and we discuss all things consciousness. Today's video specifically will focus on why we need to upgrade our consciousness and why this is a necessity in the modern age in 2024. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get into some mind expanding stuff.
So should we just recap what we've discussed so far? So we've said that consciousness means a few things to a few people. We've said that when we talk about expanding consciousness, I think even that this is not accurate or precise. I think there's refinement, clarity, focus. There's a lot of aspects.
So let's build on that first, Rocco. So see,
Yeah.
if you talked about the meditative experience of Vipassana, where you would introduce a space between yourself and your thoughts, right? So someone
That should be the
was
project.
that should be the project. So
Yes.
let's say someone who hasn't gone through that project ever, for them, what is their state of consciousness? How would you describe their state of consciousness? And then is this activity of creating the space, after this activity of creating the space, what is the state of consciousness that that person can experience or does experience generally?
I think the best way of describing that is to take a step sideways and look at other forms of other ways in which humans can refine their conduct, their behavior, their whatever. So when you learn to speak, you learn to speak just by how your parents speak, but you can actually get pronunciation lessons and you can actually get vocabulary and so there's different ways in which human beings can sharpen and refine a default skill in many things. So you get fine motor coordination, but then you get somebody who can be a pianist and they can not only articulate their fingers, but they can do it with an integrated muscle memory of where certain notes in the keyboard are in order to play a piece of music. So there's an articulation skill there, but these things, we have default abilities. Any child can hit every single note on the keyboard, but they can't move it like that without cramping, or they can't reach an octave without there's lots of ways, lots of areas of our life which we start off with a default that some people have natural talents for and others don't. It could be how to do a certain style of jumping. There's a million things here that we could talk about. I'm trying to think of a really useful one, perhaps. So
You think of an example, Rocco. I think what we're getting to is it could be that there are all these ways to live. We would not want to say that there are right and wrong ways, but you could say that there are better and worse ways. And what
the
this
Buddhists say
could
it best, they call it skillful.
Hmm.
So there's a more skillful way to do things.
Yeah.
Now, people can be skillful in relationships, they can be skillful in communication, they can be
Mm.
skillful in lovemaking, they can be skillful in, right. And you can be
Teaching. Yeah.
skillful in
Mm.
your application or in your use of awareness and consciousness.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
there's not easy or right way, there's not really a right or a proper way to say that sentence because you don't use awareness. There's a more skillful way to be aware
To be aware. Yeah.
and to have the human experience,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
which turns on this wheel
Yeah.
of consciousness and all of its aspects. And
Mm. You know, this actually reminds me, I was reading this book by Viktor Frankl, not Man's Search for Meaning, but his book called The Will to Meaning, where he explains how there are different levels of understanding, right? And he would say there are higher and lower levels of understanding, which can very easily be misinterpreted as if he's judging people for having a lower understanding and appreciating someone for having a higher understanding. But
yeah,
what he goes on to explain is higher is simply something that could be more inclusive. So imagine a cone. If you were to look at it from the top, you'll only see a circle. If you look at it from the side, you'll only see a triangle. Both of them are also true. But you can see, everyone can intuitively see that a higher way of understanding, a higher way of looking is actually looking at the cone, is actually
I
understanding
call
that
it
there is a cone.
transcendent
Yes,
perspective,
yes,
not a
yes.
better perspective.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah.
So it's easy to understand that there's this side and that side,
Hmm, hmm.
but when you look at the point of the triangle and you can see how those two are related in the triangle,
Hmm,
in other words, to zoom out and look at a triangle, now you
hmm,
can understand how two different points,
hmm.
there's not one that's cardinal. There's this one and that one, and this is
Yeah,
the way you can look at both those things.
yeah.
And a transcendent perspective, there
Hmm,
are
hmm,
transcendent perspectives,
hmm.
and they follow the same curve or the same vector as emergence, wherein a greater arc of relevance or context is revealed when you look at it from this higher
Yeah,
perspective or this
perspective.
higher understanding.
Yeah.
And when we say higher, we mean it sheds light and reconciles that which is unreconcilable at a lower
Mm, mm,
understanding
mm.
and provides more perspective, more context, more relativity. Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes, it's funny because someone who's stuck at a lower level cannot even see the utility of a higher level because they're so stuck in it. You
Correct. Now
know?
that is where I wanted to steer the conversation of consciousness, because that is really how we inhabit consciousness.
Mm, mm, mm,
So there is a concept or a phenomenon called a paradigm.
mm, mm.
And a paradigm is a model of relating to reality
Yeah.
that we have a copy of, that we have a copy of in our
Mm,
consciousness.
yeah. Yeah. Mm, mm,
So this is now where you've got the room and the window and the light. You make the mistake of, so the best explanation of a paradigm is Plato's cave. You make the
mm,
mistake of assuming that the full story and the model of reality that
mm,
you are
mm,
subscribing to,
mm,
you
mm.
make the mistake of assuming this is the whole of it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So imagine uh, a baby in a
Mm,
womb.
yeah.
Awareness arrives at some point, but one can't tell exactly the moment awareness arrives. My work suggests awareness emerges
Mm.
and that begins with meta awareness, but eventually there
Meta,
is an awareness.
meta awareness.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example of meta awareness.
Mm,
Um, when you're watching a movie that's very well made, they use certain music tones to elicit certain kind of emotional responses. You
mm,
are meta aware of that because some aspect of your apparatus, is perceiving that change or that signal, and it's reacting in a way that you don't choose,
mm, mm,
which still affects your experience.
mm,
That to me is meta awareness.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
if you sometimes, when the music stops at a party and everyone's just chatting,
mm,
you start feeling uncomfortable, but you don't know why. In fact, you don't
mm,
even know yet that you feel uncomfortable.
mm, mm, mm,
And then eventually it dawns on you and you go, oh, where's the music? And then you connect the dots to the feeling and the absence of music. And so you
mm,
were meta aware of something. And then it's almost like it breached a certain waterline of awareness.
mm, mm,
Right.
mm. Yeah. Okay.
So the baby in the womb, the fetus in the womb, not the baby,
Mm,
it would be meta aware of things.
mm,
You
mm,
know,
mm,
it doesn't know hunger because it's
mm,
joined to the mother's stomach. It doesn't understand weather, warm,
mm,
cold, because the mother's body keeps it a constant temperature. It
mm,
doesn't, so its whole experience, its paradigm of life would be limited to the environment. It would be, the
mm,
paradigm is emergent from the
mm,
awareness, as the
mm,
awareness considers itself in relationship to the environment. So it's
mm,
an emergent thing.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Complete
But
that. Okay.
we don't know what the fetus was thinking, or
Mm,
if it thinks the way we consider thinking,
yeah.
but it you can conceive that it might be having a form of experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason that they move like this, you can imagine that it has a relationship with comfort, that it feels uncomfortable and then it wriggles to move until it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Or its nerves are coming in, so the legs start doing this. We don't know that
Mm,
that's a choice or an action, but there
mm,
is a relationship between experience, stimulus, and response that
mm,
is nevertheless happening. And there must be a form of experience that's happening as well,
mm, mm.
a form of experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that baby at some point in time, or that fetus at some point in time, um, like the signals, the nervous signals of the mother's body, that it's filled its space now. Now, what
Mm,
used to be perfect, that it didn't have questions about, now suddenly starts becoming less perfect,
mm,
starts feeling cramped, right?
mm,
And then
mm,
eventually the signal comes that it must now be born.
mm,
And whatever our consciousness and our sense of identity as a self is, it's firmed up in that moment, where it must now move towards something that must feel comparatively like death, an
yeah.
ending to the way that it has been. And then it gets, for the very first time, this enormous, enormous initiation, this rude awakening into crisis
Mm,
and struggle. And then this is my intuition, where the sense of self is forged in that, in the heart of that crisis, in the heart of that calamity, in the heart of
mm,
that separation from perfection that it had before.
mm, mm.
And then it arrives in this place that it has no context for,
Mm,
completely shattered paradigm.
yeah.
Its eyes now and ears now suddenly work, where it would have been meta aware of
Mm,
sound of the mother's body or the heart beating. Now it's hearing very loud, sharp noises, the doctor smacking it. It's feeling the breath in its lungs for the first time, so the lungs burns and it starts
mm,
crying.
yeah.
I don't think it's feeling sad or hurt, or I don't think it's got, I don't think it's fair to say that that awareness has that clarity of
Mm,
perception to be able to attach to what we think of as hungry or sad, quiet. It's just comfort or discomfort. It's very binary.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
as that little awareness grows, depending on the stimulation and experience that it's given,
Mm,
it's so, and the talents that it has, and the genetics that it has, and the environment that it's in, a combination of many things would then
mm,
start culminating in the arrival, the gradual arrival of a sense of self and an awareness. But the
mm,
awareness arrives way before the sense of self.
mm, mm, mm.
and the theory of mind, being able to conceptualize that other people are a self.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this is,
Mm.
we don't know all of this, but this is the domain of psychology
Yeah.
that's already explored and qualified. But let's expand that view now. So this baby grows
Mm.
up, but what it was born into was Plato's cave.
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
so then it gets told by the family, which are chained like the prisoners in Plato's cave, staring at the back wall of their
Mm.
reality and
Yeah.
saying, this is what the truth is. And
Mm.
they didn't get born into the real world. They got born into a paradigm, which is a selective way of interpreting reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then at some point in time, it goes and has first experiences. It has a chocolate for the first time, or an ice cream,
Mm.
or it falls down the stairs, or another child hits it, or a
Mm.
dog bites it, and it becomes aware of different orders of danger and threat and expense and chaos and unknowns, uncertainties in the world.
Mm.
And at some point in time, we go through what we think is the awakening of an education, or the awakening of adulthood, or the awakening of adolescence, or
Mm.
some form of rude awakening, right?
Mm. 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 Mm.
And then we realize that this corner of the very large cave that we were born into was just a paradigm,
Mm.
and there's a reality that's unfolding in that cave, which means the ideas that your parents had or your society had are limited, stupid, broken, and that this same cave, on that wall, there's Christians looking that way, Hindus looking this way, Muslims looking that way, atheists
Yeah.
looking that way, but they're all looking at a cave.
At a
And
cave.
Plato
Correct.
said, then the trick is you wriggle yourself free and you first try and understand what you're looking at in the cave.
Mm.
It's not like you're going to immediately understand that you're in a game where you're watching the back wall with a fire behind you and someone between you and the fire holding up shapes so that you can
Mm.
see these shadows on the wall, and you can hear the bicycle creaking or the chicken squawking, and then you must now make up a story of reality
Mm.
matching sounds to shadows. You'll just make up some drama story that has no relevance to reality, and who knows whether it's right or wrong. Who
Mm.
can
Mm.
verify that? Because all
Yeah.
the people that you're verifying it with are also looking at the back wall of that
Yeah.
cave.
And also interpreting it with their own lenses. Yes.
Right. And then you encounter different groups, or you travel, or you have cultural expansion, or you watch television, or you get on the internet. And we have different ways in which our paradigms expand and connect and collapse. And yeah,
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
beliefs
Yeah.
sustain these paradigms.
Yeah.
But the project, as Plato says, is to wriggle yourself free. Whether you can or can't make sense of what's happening in that cave, the aim is then to climb out of that cave. So if
Mm.
you can imagine there's a small womb here, and
Mm.
then you go into a cave,
Mm. Mm.
and I might actually, do you think we can use a whiteboard for a minute?
That'll be great, Rocco.
With something so simple as this. There's the baby in the womb there,
Mm.
and there's I'm going to draw a terrible baby, but you get the idea, right?
Yes. Oh,
And
that's a
then
good one, Rocco. Yeah.
they're born into this cave, and
Yeah.
we know that the shape of Plato's cave is always like this, right?
Mm.
Where here's here's the people sitting in a
Mm.
row,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And they're
Mm.
looking that way at the back wall of a cave, all right?
Mm.
And over here
Mm.
there's fire, and there's
Mm.
people walking between there and there, holding different
Mm.
shapes up that cast shadows on the back.
Shadows there. Yeah.
And then the aim now is you escape out of here
Mm.
and you
Mm.
wriggle into what's supposed to be the real world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the theory anyway.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
What I'm suggesting is you think of it that you are born into a paradigm
Mm.
with different layers of clarity and illusion, right? Because eventually when you figure out what the hell's happening in this cave, then you can see the arrangement and you can make sense of it. But the very first time you look around and look that way, if all you've ever known your whole life is the story that everybody else in the line told you is happening, you won't even understand what the hell this is. So then you break the paradigm that way, and then you can deepen it and deepen it. The more you learn, the more perspectives you get, the more you understand. But the aim is then to climb out, right? But this is where it gets, I think, where the clarity comes in, right? Because then we find internet spirituality or internet philosophy, or we find our first video on Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson, and our mind expands. But we don't realize that all we're doing is this.
Yeah.
And they're telling you the truth about what they know.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone's looking off in these directions. But the amazing thing is that here, when we encounter something like religion or spirituality, they'll just say, oh, beyond here is the mystery of God. It's just, who knows? Who knows? But then somebody will take psychedelics or will study as a mystic for so many years, or find the Buddhist path or study Kabbalah, and they will eventually learn that there's a way out.
Yeah.
Right. And that there's different layers of illusion that we can circumvent here. But you'll never guess.
I want to say something. It's turtles all the way up. That's what the
Yes,
analogy is,
right.
right? Yeah.
So you understand the concept that I believe, right? So then you must imagine the crazy project of us looking at the madness of the world and the confusion that we have in ourselves in any given moment. And then we say, this is it. We've reached the edge. Got it. Well done, boys.
Kudos.
But it can also be confusing to imagine, well, what's the point of this endless? The point is the baby becomes master of its womb until it outgrows the womb. Then it must be born into the world. But when it's born into the world, even though that neck of birth is the biggest adventure and ordeal it's ever experienced and feels like a death, at the end of that death is actually the beginning of a life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't arrive there and then it's all done. It arrives there and it's only just begun. It's arrived there completely unprepared, completely unskilled, completely ignorant. And through the care and the initiation that it's given into that life, and the guidance that it's given and the opportunities and the way that it encounters reality and guides itself, well or badly, it then eventually understands or occupies or gets locked into one corner of that cave and lives in a paradigm. Now, your consciousness, if your consciousness is struggling through depression, for example, it means that the reality that you are subscribing to, the paradigm that you are subscribing to, is not tracking the reality that you're experiencing. That's what we call insanity, right? And then depression is the sense of vitality that you have.
Depression is the lack of
Depression
that
is the
sense
absence of vitality.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and that means that you are feeling that way because your interactions with reality don't track what the body that you inhabit actually needs, what the self that you actually are, how it wants to connect and relate to the world.
mm,
and the
mm, mm,
reality that you are a part of through your body and through the cosmos or the cave or the this world that you're born into, right?
mm, mm, mm,
So if you
mm,
are feeling like everything is wrong, one of the things that you need to do is start clearing up your lenses
mm,
and your ability to receive more light and to turn that window where you'd like to, because it's not really a window, it's actually like a telescope,
mm,
but that window can also become a microscope. It can also become a field of awareness
mm,
and vision.
mm, mm, mm,
And then our spiritual project is how we connect with that light and find out how we belong to that. And
mm,
philosophy is the attempt to explain um, both how one should operate and what the limits of real are and what the design of the universe is. And religion is those two projects
mm.
crammed and condensed and pointed at the back wall of a cave to
Okay.
say, pretending to be philosophy, pretending to be
Mm,
spirituality, but frozen into forms of control and capture that keep you in a fixed paradigm. And the problem with paradigms is the world is emergent,
mm,
reality is emergent, and paradigms try to keep things fixed like the shell of an egg.
yeah.
Right. So we invariably outgrow our paradigms. That's not
Mm,
because we're evolving and expanding um, in a noble way. Sometimes, if you expose 8 billion people to social media over 10 years, they will adapt.
mm,
And so the ways that we are adapting in our how we connect with each other, how we see ourselves in relation to the world, all of those things are being influenced
mm,
by a stream that's coming in through that window, and somebody else is designing how much you look at that window and what you get through that window and how you
mm,
should feel about those two things, your limits
mm,
and your
mm, mm, mm,
experiences. And that is how business, religion, and ideology or politics shape our reasoning and our thinking. So they're not just directing our consciousness as a unfolding experience, they're directing the paradigms that we
mm,
subscribe to, that we each keep versions of in ourselves
mm,
and that
mm,
we
mm.
share versions of with each other, so that we
Yeah.
have a paradigm of a society, we have a paradigm of a family, we have a paradigm of a couple. But our paradigms of what a couple and a marriage should be is something someone told you, and how
Mm,
it should and shouldn't work is something
mm,
someone told you.
mm.
Part of that telling is religious and moralistic and ideological and political. And do you understand?
Biological. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
So now I hope that you can see why we need to upgrade our consciousness. Because if we don't, firstly, we limit ourselves. And not just that, we limit ourselves and we are never able to come out of that deep sense of uneasiness that we feel with our own lives. That deep sense of uneasiness that always stays somewhere within our minds, within our hearts, within our consciousness, but we keep suppressing it down. And because we keep suppressing it down, it boils up and manifests in various different issues in our own lives and the issues that we see all around us in our society. For example, the mental health crisis that you see throughout the world, it is in no small part because of the fact that we perceive the world through the lens of our limited consciousness. We need to come out of the limited paradigms we are living in. We need to come out of the limited paradigms that we have outgrown already, but we are just so attached to them that we can't let go of them. We've always had to do that, mind you. This is not something new, but the intensity of those paradigms has increased manifold in the modern age with the social media, the algorithms that that drive all these personalized echo chambers which you find yourself surrounded by throughout your day. That has never happened before in human history. And therefore, today's biggest project, today's biggest crisis that human beings are facing is the fact that we have limited consciousness with which we perceive the world, with which we act out in the world. And that is the project to come out of. That is the project to focus on, to upgrade your consciousness. This reminds me of one of my favorite philosophers, Jiddu Krishnamurti. He said something to the tune of, it is no measure of sanity to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, to a profoundly insane society. We need to come out of this insanity. We need to come out of this sick society, firstly as individuals and then as a collective. Part 3 of this 4-part series will come out in a few days, and that is where myself and Rocco Jarman will be talking about how you can upgrade your consciousness. Till then, there is a lot of more content on my channel which you can check out. My personal recommendation would be the playlist that would be appearing on your screen right now. I've collated a bunch of videos where I talk about what to do when you feel stuck, when you feel lost, when you feel almost meaningless in your life. I would also recommend going through a lot of Rocco's stuff. He has written some beautiful articles on his Substack. He has authored a few beautiful books already. In fact, one of which I have already reviewed on my channel, Stepping Through, one of my favorite self improvement books. Make sure you check out that video too. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the playground soon again. Until next time, peace out.